coordinator from Professor Gustavo Maciel, and my supervision. I invite Professor Maciel to start our meeting.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, all of you, for being here. And most of all, thank you, Professor Ehud, Professor Tali, and also Professor José Maria. And Professor Carlos Serrano has a problem in his flight. He's a little bit late and he'll be here in a few minutes. But it's for us, it's a pleasure to have this partnership with Hebrew University. And this partnership actually started 20 years ago, because Ehud was a postdoc together with me in the same laboratory in San Diego. And in that time, I got to meet them. And then Ehud already came here once in Brazil and then made some conferences. And after some time, his wife, Tali, decided, who's also a researcher, she decided to make some bonds with us too, scientific bonds, and then we're starting some projects. I think that's it's a good idea, especially because they are very serious, and then it's more than that, they are very productive scientists in the Hebrew. And I think that in this sense, it's very aligned with our institution. And then it's that's why we are here. I'm going to do a little introduction about the speakers today. Ehud is a full professor of the Faculty of Medicine and Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel, and also deputy of the dean in the same institution. Dr. Tali Burstein is also professor of development biology and cancer research at the School of Dental Medicine of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Professor José Maria, as you know, because it's from our department, is associated professor of gynecology, head of our department of obstetrics and gynecology, and also associated editor of the Clinics Journal. And then this is a pleasure for us, José Maria, to have you here, because you are you publish a lot, and more than that, you have a great work here in our institution. And thank you for coming. And also, Dr. Carlos Serrano is associated professor of the Department of Cardiology and the Heart Institute here in our institution, and also president of the Committee of Culture and Extension of the USP, and member of the Brazilian Medical Association. And the idea of this seminar is basically talk a little bit about the challenges of publishing these days. And then we are going to start with some words of Professor Ehud, and then we're going to invite all the members to come and to talk a little bit about those challenges that we face every day. Professor Ehud, please.
Thank you, Gustavo. Thank you, Jose Maria. I'm very informal, so I don't call everyone professor. This is the Israeli way. And thank you all for coming today. So Gustavo asked me to talk a little bit about scientific writing and how we actually approach this challenge nowadays. I'll just say that my lab at the Hebrew U focuses on the biology of aging mainly, and we also study the links between the aging process and toxic protein aggregation that underlies the development of group of maladies. Maybe the best known are neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson as well. Now, I'm mentioning that because the examples that you see in my few slides actually are taken from this field, but it's not actually, it's just because it's convenient for me. It's not necessarily different if you deal with, if you study other issues. So when we think about writing a scientific document, and I'm focusing here on a manuscript to be submitted for journals, but the same principles actually apply also for grant writing or thesis, PhD thesis, and so we need to plan this task. And I guess that all of you, probably in your early days, thought of writing a manuscript, and you sat in front of your computer and you didn't know where to start, right? Happened to everyone. So what I'm telling my students, and actually I'm teaching a course at the Hebrew U, is how to plan, how to approach this task. And the first thing that we have to ask ourselves is, what is our story? What's the story that we want to tell in this paper? So we have what we call the roadmap, which is, I think, the most important step at the beginning of the work when you prepare your material to be written.
Oi, pessoal, com licença, desculpa interromper, a energia caiu novamente. É só clicar em desmutar aí, por favor.
Third part, we work on the introduction. Why is it important? Many people start by writing the introduction, and I think it's very problematic because we know a lot of things. Introduction can consume half of the characters that we allowed to include in our paper, but it has to be very focused because the introduction actually serves the reader in order to, or serve us to inform the reader everything that he or she needs to know in order to follow the story, to follow the discussion, but nothing more than that. And this is very important because, you know, every scientific document that you write, again, grant proposal, manuscript, has limited amount of words or characters. And it's very important to use them wisely. And the best or the most frequent cases that people just overconsume words or character is by writing a very long introduction. So the introduction has to serve the reader and provide him or her with the information needed to follow your story, all the information which is needed, but nothing more than that. And lastly, we write the abstract. So first step, from whatever reason it doesn't work, I'll do it from here. And no, actually it's frozen. Okay, thanks. Okay, so first, you need to identify the most important finding, which is attractive, address important and timely biological question. This actually would be reflected in the title, but also is important in order to build the story around it. And then you need to think what is the most logical way to tell the story. For instance, I just had a WhatsApp discussion with one of my students yesterday, and we have a project and we run next generation sequencing. Actually, most of our projects involve next generation sequencing. So should we describe the project as we came in an unbiased approach and started by running this or conducting this experiment of next generation, or maybe we first tested whether transcription factors are involved. And then once we found that one transcription factor is involved, we ask what would be the genes, and we go, I mean, you can tell the story in different ways. And it's very important to think when you just design the project, design the manuscript before start writing, is what is the best way to tell the story. And there is no one correct answer here. It could be a style issue, but you need to think about it and decide what is the right way. Then we look at the discussion and we ask ourselves, what is the most interesting questions to be discussed, and what future directions we can offer. And why is this important? As I said, because in the next step, we are going to design the introduction, and the introduction has to serve both the story and the discussion. Okay, so here comes the introduction, and you should ask yourself one question: what the reader needs to know in order to understand and follow my ideas or my story. That's it. Everything that he or she needs to know, but nothing more than that. And next you ask, what's the right order of topics, how to tell it properly. Now, this is really important because if you think about the reader of a manuscript, you don't have a single reader, you have more than that. You have the editor first, you have the referees, and you have the final reader, which is actually a colleague which is interested in your paper. So if you order the topics properly, you can actually influence the type of referees that the editor would send the papers to, the manuscript to, and you can do it both in the abstract as well as in the introduction. So thinking of the order of topics is, I think, very, very important. Okay. One thing that has to be stressed, and that's why I'm bringing it here, is providing a balanced overview of the field. And this is one example that I want to give you. So in 2001, there was a Nature paper published by the Lenny Guarenti lab at MIT. And actually this paper, Heidi Tissenbaum was at the time a postdoc. And in this paper, they reported that increased dosage of SIR2, a gene which is people believe that it's involved in the regulation of aging, is actually, if you overexpress it, you get lifespan extension. And if you knock it down, you get lifespan shortening. Now, it sounds like a great idea to keep following, right? And mention. But once it will come back, you'll see that in 10 years later, another lab published that this is not true. So you can actually overexpress SIR2 and you get no lifespan extension whatsoever. Now, if you ignore this development, editor, referees, readers would think either one of two things. I think the least bad situation is that you are not familiar with the literature, but it's pretty bad. The worst situation is that you are familiar with the literature, but you want to provide a picture which is biased, which is not real. So providing a balanced overview and not ignoring developments which do not actually fit in your ideas, it's a very bad idea, very bad. Okay, again, it doesn't work. So I need, okay. Okay, so here's the paper from 2011 that I mentioned before, and this paper actually, look at the title. Normally you don't see titles which are that blunt. Absence of effect of SIR2 overexpression on lifespan in C. elegans and Drosophila. This paper exclusively contains only negative data. The only thing that they say is that what was published 10 years before is wrong, but it's out there. Okay. Now, and finally, the last thing is writing the abstract and designing the abstract. I'm still talking about the roadmap. Why is this important? Because if you think about the different type of readers, the abstract actually, I think, is read by majority of people. You need to convince the editor that there is something interesting. First thing that the editor is going to look at, and you'll tell later, is the abstract. You want to attract people to read your paper. So this is your shopping window. They read the abstract. So it's very important to think what is abstract how to write it. It should be informative, interesting, focusing only on the most interesting, because in all journals it has to be very short. And if I just showing you one example of such roadmap that we wrote for one of our projects is, here's the abstract, which was written last, introduction, which was designed second to last. What is the goal? In this case, it was a grant proposal, but it's the same thing. We do the same thing for manuscripts. Here's the story, here's the significance. So we start from the core, we continue to the discussion, we design the introduction, and then design the abstract. And once we have this, and it takes pretty long time, it's a lot of work. You need to think about it very thoroughly, but once you have it, everything becomes very easy. So this is one message that I want to convey. The second thing, the second message is how to write a well-written and interesting manuscript. And again, I'm going to do it very shortly. Most important in science, you must be accurate. So if you say things like, if I use RNAi to abolish the expression of a gene, this is not true, because RNAi does not abolish, it just reduces the expression. So you must be accurate, okay? You must be linear and help the reader follow your ideas. Young students really like to repeat the ideas over and over again. You consume words and characters that you need later on, and it's better to avoid unnecessary repeat. Claim for innovation, but do not neglect the work of colleagues. Keep in mind that the colleagues that you neglect their work, they will be most likely your referees. You don't want them to piss them off, right? Use rich, articulated and well-written English. So for instance, if you talk about diseases that we all do, you can use the word disease, disorder, illness, malady. I mean, there are many words. If you want to say that this disease was onsetting, you can use onset, emerge, manifest, and so on. It's very important. It's easier to read, and it actually provides the reader with feeling of professionalism, okay? Of course, be consistent and follow the consensus in the field in writing format. So if it's a gene, it has to be italic and lowercase. If it's a protein, non-italic and uppercase, and so on. Again, it's very important. And if it's not written well, it seems like non-professional document. Okay, now since my time is very limited, I just want to raise a few questions that I think which are important for all of us as scientists, young as more senior. So who should write the manuscript of a project? Is it the PI or the student? What's going on here? Most manuscripts are written by the students themselves or the PIs? Okay, so I'll tell you I mean, in my lab, it depends. Most manuscripts I write. And the reason is that, you know, I need them. I need them not for promotion for me anymore, but I need them for the next round of grants. I need them for, you know, I need them to be out because people that I want to recruit, the first question you ask whether this publishes well. So what have you published? So I need them, whatever. And if I ask most of my students to write, first it takes forever to tell the truth. And I'm not blaming anyone, but it's a very challenging task. It's not very easy. So it's much faster if I write it and then I send it to them, but I don't think that this is a good practice of educating the people. So it depends. If it's a paper that I really need and I want it to be out because there is a grant that I want to rely on this, I will write it. But if I still have a little bit more time and the student has 2 more years to complete his or her PhD, for instance, I will let them write it. It takes much longer, but I think it's part of the process. Okay, another question which is really critical, and again, maybe Gustavo will manage it, but maybe people would have other views on what I'm saying here. When project is ready for submission, you know, it's always a story of hesitating because there are always more and more questions arise. If there are no additional questions, it means that this is not a good scientific project. Good scientific project always open new questions. And when it's ready for submission, actually some considerations may be practical considerations because the person needs to graduate. You know, he or she finishes the funding period, whoever funds your fellowship, or wants to move on to do their postdoc or whatever. And sometimes it just, you feel that it's a round story. And if you move on, you'll open more questions and the story would not be round. So I think that we never, ever completely happy at the time that we decide to complete. But we need to know that life is full of compromises. And if we feel that it's good enough, we just go for it, okay? Keep in mind another thing. If it's not good enough, the editor would reject it, and then you have more time before you submit it to the other place. But this is always a question that's in the air. Now, what should we prefer? Many small papers or few comprehensive in high impact journals? Again, it's a matter of philosophy. If you ask me, I think that the ratio between, I really hate what I'm going to say, because I think that impact factor is meaningless. But journals, they have impact factors. So what's the ratio between impact factor 5 and impact factor 10? It's not 2. It's 20 or something like that. Because if you publish in a more prestigious journal, the exposure is higher, the number of citations would be higher. People would be more impressed and invite you to meetings and all this stuff. So I prefer that my PhD students, for instance, or postdocs, will have 1 paper in a very good journal rather than 3 in small journals. Again, some other people may say different things, because some people say, oh, you want to show productivity, so it's better to have 3 small rather than 1 large one. I can tell you also, as a person who is involved in recruiting new PIs and consulting also, recruiting new PIs to the School of Medicine of the Hebrew U, where I'm employed, but I also consulting other universities in other places. And at this stage, at least, people are looking for the large, more influential papers rather than many small ones. So, but again, maybe other people would have different views. Which journal is suitable for your manuscript? And this is another thing. We all tend to fall in love with our projects and think that they are great. But there is no point in bombarding the editor of Nature with millions of manuscripts that will be most likely rejected. However, I must tell you, I think, and I'm telling my students, it's a good thing that the manuscript is being rejected at least once. Why? Because if you sent it somewhere and it was accepted, you always have the feeling maybe I could send it higher, right? But if you sent it higher and it didn't go through, it's actually solved this problem, because you know that you tried and it didn't go through. And then you go to the second or the third one. Most of our manuscripts are being accepted by the 3rd journal. That's statistically, if I'm looking over the years. The only paper which I sent and was accepted at the first one is the science paper that I published in Andrew Dillon's lab, but science, so I'm happy. But anyway, so in one hand, you should try to estimate as honestly as you can what's the best place where you can publish your paper and go one above. That's my strategy. As I said, normally we publish in the 3rd or 4th journals that we submit to. And the last thing that I think it's important to mention is how to handle rejections. And I think we should be humble, because, the fact that we are in love with our project doesn't mean that other people see it as important as it. And this is fine. This is okay. Rejections are fine. It's okay to be mad and angry for 24, 48 hours. But afterwards, you need to ask yourself, what bothered the referee? What bothered the editor? Maybe I can improve. Maybe I didn't write it properly. Maybe I can sharpen the way it's written in order to convey my ideas in a more convincing way. And maybe they are right, and I need to step back and run additional set of experiments to substantiate my finding or whatever. Because keep in mind, those individuals who review your papers, they actually, in most cases, they are not against you. They just provide you with a professional assessment, which you can learn from. So the right thing to do is to try to learn from their reviews and try to improve your manuscript for the next round. I think I consumed my 20 minutes, right? Approximately. You see? Right on time. So, hello. Yeah. I'm just, if anyone wants to ask any question or make any comments, I still have 40 seconds. Otherwise, I'll handle the microphone to Gustavo. Thank you.
Very much. All right, thank you very much, Professor Ehud. I mean, it was very nice. Now, Professor José Maria will talk a little bit about clinics, the journal of our institution, which is indexed in ICS and also in PubMed. And it's okay. Thank you.
So hello, everybody. First, I would like to say thank you, Professor Barakat, for inviting me, and Professor Gustavo, and also Professor Gustavo for introducing me here. So it is a pleasure to stay here. And I would also like to say thank you to Professor Luis Felipe. He's the editor of the clinics, because he chose me to represent him here in this meeting. And also, as head of Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, I would like to say welcome. It's important for us to receive both professors, Professor Tali and Professor Bron here. So it's really important for us. And I would like to talk about clinics. Clinics is the official journal of our institution. Our institution, Faculdade de Medicina, Medical School of USP, and the Hospital das Clínicas. So I would like to say some data of the clinics. So I put clinics in numbers. So first, I would like to talk about the published manuscript. You can see here, since 2014, 2023. And the most of manuscripts that you received and accepted and approved to publish was original manuscript. Many of them clinical trials. But you have some reviews. Many of them systematic reviews. And you can see here that the most accepted manuscript, published manuscript, are from our institution, from Hospital das Clínicas, and the other parts of the Brazil. But after 2017, 2018, we try to be more international. We invite the research to publish in clinics, and also after 2021, we enter to the Elsevier platform. It was important because it increased the view of your journal in the world. And you can see here that 2022 and 2023, we'll try to increase the number of manuscripts from China, Turkey, United States, Europe. And our journal is published in English, is a continuous flow and open access. And you have indexing, Web of Science, PubMed Central, Medline, Sysmago, Embase, and Lilacs. And also our impact factor is 2.7. And you take the citation per documents is 2.09. And you can see the evolution of our impact factor. And you can see that the Elsevier helped helped to improve our impact factor because of the view. It was really important. But also you have the COVID pandemic. And the manuscript on COVID helped us to improve our impact. So right now you have to figure out other ways to improve our impact. And we are thinking about that to do a special issues, or you have to participate more the scientific meetings to show the clinical journal. And what's our indicators 2022? Submit manuscript 653. Approve percentage of manuscripts 21%. Our peer reviews are really tough to approve, but it's important because it has impact in our factor. The approval period. So you start the manuscript in your site until the final approval of the manuscript. The means 125 days. It's too much. You have to short this. The first review is 89 days. It's another problem. And the length for publish is 128 days. So also you have other problems is the peer review. And the peer review, I believe, is a problem in the world for all the journals. Because you have to find a good research that think that to help the insights is important. For free, it's a big problem. But you believe that you can improve this part, also can put special issues. One issue that I invite Professor Baraka to do is the female health, the problems of female health. And another one is oncology. And to participate in the scientific meetings, you need money. Support, it's another problem in our country. I believe in the world, you know, because there was. So I would like, it's a short presentation for everybody to know what's clinics, what's the important clinics for our institution, and also for the world. And also, I would say thank you very much for the professor to stay here. It's important for us, it's an opportunity for all the students to stay here, and also for our departments. So thank you very much for staying here.
Okay, and then I would like to invite all the speakers to come. Professor Cruz, please. Senhor também, professor. Aí eu vou dar a palavra para ele. Sim. Vamos, professor. All right. And then we'll raise some questions here, and then we're going to open for. Okay. Cabe todo mundo? Eu vou ter que pegar mais um. Vou pegar mais um. Ô, Cláudia, você pega uma cadeira mais. So I'd like to invite Professor Carlos Serrano. Thank you very much for coming, and just to use the.
Thank you, Dr. Gustavo, and it's also a pleasure having Dr. Cohen here with us, visiting us at our faculty, and same with Dr. Barakat and José Maria, Katia, for the invitation here. I'm one of the, I used to be until a couple of years ago, editor, and also worked with Judge Maria with our journal, Revista of our Medical Brazilian Association, RAMB, Revista da AMB. And those years that I stayed there was very interesting. And I want to pass some experience that I had there. In addition, here at the faculty, in leading the Comissão de Cultura de Extensão, which is our extension and culture, we have two points that we did here starting this year. In March, I'm sure many of you are aware that we did an event, a very short event, 2 hours. It's called ChatGPT in Health. And one of the topics that we discussed here was in medical writing on ChatGPT, which is want to discuss with you one of these points, and also with Dr. Coyne. What's the role of ChatGPT in medical writing as well as in medical research? I just want to give 2 points that I personally consider important in using ChatGPT. It's that it could be help the writers in putting like a starting point to write on a topic, not too much in putting up a project or writing a project, but for writing the paper by itself. And sometimes we need a sort of like a help to start this in discussing. And not only based on ChatGPT. The second point that I want to discuss is with the language barrier. Sometimes in writing in English, ChatGPT for strangers, for internationals not familiar with English, could be a very helpful, and that could be one positive point. And a third point is, if for doing some kind of research, if I put a topic, and I'm really not too much familiar in this topic, I want to put it as an example. In my field, if I work in atherosclerosis and I put in Google, for example, pathophysiology of atherosclerosis, in very few seconds, there's around 100,000 topics coming up on my screen. And I have to probably go one by one or start with the first topics and reading this. If I put the same question in ChatGPT, it comes just one topic writing in a few seconds. So there's sort of like a filter, and it's not so much profound as if I looked in very specific scientific journals that appear in Google, but it does help if I want to have some sort of idea. So these are 2 topics that I wanted to discuss on this: medical writing, publishing, using ChatGPT. It's a very big topic. Everyone here have one certain, it's that it's here to stay. But we have to be very careful in how you're using it and what's the as a tool in writing with the ethical and legal parts of using this. Thank you.
Those are very nice questions, and then I'd like to put in discussion.
I have a comment or a question to Professor Hood and also Professor Tali. You talk about writing. You told it's for PI, the research, or the students. I believe it's both. You have to share. It's education. It's important, because what is important for the postgraduates, for the PhD? PhD is philosophy notorium, no? So you have to practice. You have to induce the students to think. For that, you have to write. So, and you write with you. You have to have a time for this. You have to see what the student have to say, his ideas. It's important. And after you can give the experience that you have to write a good journal. But the problem in our world is time consuming. It's a big problem. So I would like to know what you think about this. You told me a little bit, but give me more, Professor Tali also.
Okay, thank you.
Who writes your papers?
Who writes my papers? So I think that I devised a system which is in the middle, because I really believe in the mentorship role that I have and the education that I have to give to my students. And I want them, it's like a baby at the beginning, he crawls and then he stands up. And these are the first steps in science, in independent scientific writing. So at the beginning, I take their hand and I do it. And they are my scientific children, right? So I think it's easiest for the student to relate to their results and work. So I tell them, organize the results. This connects with what Ehud said earlier, that it doesn't start from the introduction, but the data. Let's sit and organize the figures, because then if you organize the figures, you have to run the whole order of the publication in your head, and what makes sense. Put this first, put this later. This is part of the discussion that we have, and they relate. They know really what they did, and maybe put this, and then comes up the thinking. Do you think this would fit here? Do you think this would fit here? How do we show this? Maybe we show this in later. Is it a supplemental data or a main figure, or does it come later at the end? Should we give a schematic, like an outline of the experiment, so it would be easier for people to understand and read our paper and these things? And then it's also easier for the students to write the methods and the figure legends. Figure legends is tough. It's very tough. It has to be succinct. It has to be standalone. It has, yeah. So that's a big challenge. And from there, I think everything is more downhill. And this is the way we do it together.
That's very nice. But because of the time, I have some questions, because Professor Carlos told us. It's about GPT, and I think there's a paradox. The paradox is the lack of time that Professor José Maria told, and the ChatGPT availability. And more than that, to make it worse, ChatGPT indeed restrict your thinking, right? And your interest. Do you use ChatGPT somehow, or you guys use, or I'd like to know. Do you use, Professor, too? Okay.
So first, I have to say that in my mind, ChatGPT is out there, and we have no way to control people whether they use it or not. So we need to learn and live with it, whether we like it or not. This is one thing. The other thing, I played with it several times, and my impression is that ChatGPT is not going to write your paper. ChatGPT is going to improve the writing of your paper. If you accept you don't necessarily have to accept, because, it's a software. It's not necessarily understands everything, but it can definitely improve English. For me, it's actually a substitute for professional English editing. Sometimes people, especially people not born into the English, just like me and Tali, and I think everyone here in the room, it could be useful to use the capabilities of people who are native English speakers just to improve our writing. And this is what ChatGPT does, basically. And I don't see it as a threat. I don't see it as something as a bad development. I think it's out there. We need to learn to live with it and take advantage of the benefits that we can get from this software.
Yeah, I agree with you. Sometimes I see it as an example that when I was a student and I used to we were learned to do math. I think everybody heard of this example of doing counting, math. Then came the ruler, right? That really helped. And we were not permitted to use the ruler in our tests, math tests. Just we need to do the calculation. Then came the calculator. So I think the ChatGPT is kind of working this way. It's going to help, but it's not going to substitute our counting. But I think we have to use it the right way, the ethical way, the legal way, and certainly it would be very helpful in some situations that we are limited. But as Dr. Cohen mentioned, it's not going to write the paper, but it sometimes it helps. I think it's putting up some ideas and also with language barrier. And if we use it right, the purpose is that we're going to improve our writing. We're going to improve our article. And that's very important. And that's all that we want, to improve our writing and putting it in the right words and correct language. Okay.
I believe that ChatGPT or another artificial intelligence cannot replace the research. They can replace write the paper. I think it's important for us, important for the students, for all the scientific community. And so many AIs, many. You have someone that can help to edit your manuscript. I have one's Billy Holt that can change your phrases because you have a problem of the plagiarism in the world. So can help with this. But I believe the day that the artificial intelligence write your manuscript, write your paper, finish science. Finish science, finish the research, finish the PI.
Okay. I'd like to open to the audience. Any questions, professors? Yara, please.
My question is, in your opinion, what's the value of publishing negative data or no correlation? Because we are very resistant. Sometimes when we don't have correlation. In another point, what about preliminary data for publishing?
So, no, it always a question. I don't like to publish preliminary data because first I want to, I imagine myself, and it happens many times that I stand in front of audience in wherever, Cold Spring Harbor or other places, and I need to be confident that what I tell my colleagues who are sharp, they know the field very well, what I say is well substantiated, and if it's preliminary, I feel uncomfortable, although sometimes we do it, but we say this is very preliminary and, maybe next year or I don't know, in 6 months, we'll meet again. I'll tell you that this is not true. But publishing preliminary, I have the feeling that publication has to be substantial because you cannot redraw it. Once it's out there, it's out there. Pilot study is similar, yeah. It's so. Generally speaking, although there are some exceptions, I think it's better to wait for the comprehensive and convincing data. This is my opinion, at least. Now, regarding negative data, I think that depends which journals you're aiming for, but many journals are not interested in that. By the way, I gave the example of the Nature paper, which is exclusively negative data. And the lead author there was David James. I asked David, I know David, he's at UCL at University College London. I asked him, how did you convince the editor of Nature to publish a paper which is completely negative? And he told me, oh, it took some, I had to be a little cunning. I have to tease her. I met the editor and I told her, I have something very important, but you'll never publish it. She said, why wouldn't I? Said, because it's all negative. And actually, it's not only negative, it challenges a paper which was published in your journal, in Nature. She said, no, we are open for that. He said, oh, you need to show me that you are open. And he was teasing her in word. But in many cases, it doesn't work, but maybe editors can tell me. Editors are less, I think, open to publish negative data because in a way it's less interesting, although it could be very, very important.
Yeah, but in this sense, there is a big difference between biology or basic science and clinic science, because sometimes the clinic science, the negative results is very, very important to at least show that that work or that, for example, that drug does not work. And in biology, it's still worse because sometimes you work, and you got nothing, isn't it? For me, it personally was an experience, a painful experience, because in clinical trials, you do have the results, and then positive or negative, the results are important. But in biology, when you go to the bench, sometimes you get you work 2 years, you have results, and the results means nothing. They are there, and it doesn't fit in your story. That's terrible. Talk about and after you about the negative, and the preliminary data, about your view, please.
Okay, I think personally that negative data is very important because we are walking in a path. Positive, negative, it guides us where to go, and it guides others. So it's very difficult to publish a paper full of negative data. I have another example that I know in Nature Neuroscience. I think 3 or 4 years ago, there was a paper on how do microglia in the brain replenish themselves. So you can deplete them and suddenly, so they're not from the blood, they're not from the stem cells, they're not from here, they're not from there. A whole negative paper, and it's very important because it leads the field somewhere. At the end, they found, but yeah, so it's important, negative data. I think that some things that don't work, I think they're part of the whole project, and I tend to include them because it also makes what did work more specific. And you say, okay, so not everything that I do works, okay, so this is not the direction. We didn't find it, so we thought maybe this and this. And it's information which is important for my audience, whoever reads my paper, for my colleagues. So I think that negative data is important. It depends on how you present it, maybe. Regarding preliminary data, I think, well, for grant writing, it's very important. Sometimes during publishing, we had some preliminary data that oftentimes I didn't feel quite secure to include in the paper. But then during the review process, I introduced these preliminary data in my rebuttal letter to the reviewers, so they know that we are in this direction, or we tried this, but it didn't work, but it's only preliminary and or it did work, but I'm not confident enough. I need to reassure this. I don't want to put it in the paper, but just so you know, we validated it preliminarily.
Gustavo, I believe that both the negative results, clinical or basic, is difficult to publish. But see, the basic, it's more tough. Why? Because you have to prove that you are right. It's really negative, don't have this effect. And this consumes money, time, and financial support. And sometimes, if you ask for Brazilian, you have here CAPS, have FAPESP, and you send the negative ones and say, oh, I would keep it with this line to prove that it's real, the truth. But they say, it's negative, why? Insist with this. There's no way. So it's the big problem, it's the basic. And the clinic you finish. Oh, you give the medicine, the drugs, and you finish, you have results. That's it. You can come back and return. It's the point. So I believe they both sometimes is difficult, because the journals want the magic. They want us to some paper that the people, oh, there is the effect of this drugs or this substance or else. It's a big problem.
And my father used to tell me that even the genius do bad things because oh, this guy is a genius. Einstein is a genius. He said, no. Einstein did a lot of bad things also. Professor.
Thank you. I just want to mention a few things that I consider important. First, it's very interesting to have this international collaboration and see different ideas. I'm very thankful for this. Second point is, I think about very good questions. I think we should actually publish and go after, in that journals should try to accept negative data. First, one point is that negative data opens other doors, right? So I think that's a very good, and it also helps others, investigators that would probably be going in the same direction. They're going to change directions, and they're going to go after new other questions for this. So I think that's very important. About preliminary data, it's sort of like going to the moon and putting your flag on the moon. And so you're the first one there. When you publish your preliminary data, you're sort of like putting your authorship in this kind of investigation, even though it shows the others that you're going for this direction, but you don't have all the data completely. So you have to be very clear that it's preliminary data or pilot study that you're going after. I think a good way to do this is putting your studies in clinical trials, for example. So this is a way that you're going, so everyone knows in the scientific community what you're studying, investigating, even without any data, but if you're putting your, and whose interest is going to be following you also for this. And also another opportunity for this preliminary data or negative data is putting up in scientific meetings, in abstracts. And so that's another way. It's not the same impact, of course, as in journals, but it's also a way of seeing how your findings are accepted in a specific scientific community with this.
Say a sentence regarding this. Getting back to Earth practically. My experience, I never submit the preliminary data, but I've seen that when people submit preliminary data, normally the journals or the editor says, oh, this is very important stuff, but it's more suitable for more specific journal. And then they go down and down and down. Eventually it's going out for review, and then the referees ask you to do everything in order to substantiate it, and you end up in a very low impact journal with a full project. So for me, it makes no sense.
Yeah, but I think that there is today they develop some tools to how do I say, to save this kind of ineditism. And then, for example, the RX Bio and the bioarchives, and even during the COVID crisis, it was very important to have a place to deposit new ideas or new preliminary results, and they were useful indeed. But I agree with this. But I think that it was a good way to make sure that nobody steals your idea and say no, that was the flag. Okay, questions? Giovanna, questions? Edson, questions? Professor Mocina, questions? Otherwise, we have questions. Ceci?
Thank you very much for this lecture and the discussion. I was thinking about the management of time. Once Pablo Neruda, for instance, he sat in his chair and he wrote only 2 pages each day. And this was his way to manage the time in order to use the rest of time to think about what he would produce. So I was curious of how you manage time with this distribution, if it's better just to sit from 7 to 7 or to write a little piece every day. And also choosing the journal. For those who are already into some area is much easier, but those who are starters, maybe, well, should I go this way or that way? Which tools would we use, like journal finders, or what else could we do to choose the paper, the journal where we are submitting our paper? Thank you.
I know the secret because they don't have WhatsApp. You first.
Okay. Okay, great questions. And it's a pleasure really to be here. I'm really enjoying this. Thank you for having us. Time management, it's very individual. It also depends what other things you have to do. You know, you think about it, we are in this type of thing, writing, it goes with you. If you sit from 10 to 2 on the chair at 3 or 4 or 10 p.m., you still are thinking of what, and maybe your best idea how to reorganize the paper would come at 10 p.m. in your shower. I don't know. So, exactly. However, in order to advance, sometimes I already came to my office and I closed the door and I said, I'm not here until 1 p.m. Until 1 p.m., I'm in my bunker and I'm writing. So it's very individual. Your second question was which journal? So by the time we are ready to submit, already we know the paper, we know the work, we probably had opportunities to present it in scientific meetings, in seminars. We know who the audience is, we know what area. Maybe an editor has heard us in the audience and approach, and you know, you know which papers which journals you like and which journals. And like Ehud said, you know, always try to hit for a higher tier. If it's something more general, if it's something more specific, if it's basic with clinical implications or not. For instance, I have this debate almost every time. I'm a basic scientist, but my work relates to clinical stuff. And for instance, so I published in JCI, Journal of Clinical Investigations, recently. And it was very nice because it opened my basic research even to clinicians and vice versa, so, and translational issues. And now we're very much working on translational stuff. So yeah, and anything works.
Yeah, so I'll start with your second question, where to publish. And as I said before, I mean, it's kind of a tricky thing to decide or to get yourself believe where the paper is suitable. And you people, like we need to read. And you see similar type of work where other people publish, and it also tells what the editors are interested in. So if you see that a lab of competitors or colleagues actually published a nice paper in a certain journal, even in the cover letter, I can write to the editor, you know, using similar approaches and, you know, expanding the knowledge which was provided or the insight that were provided by our colleagues. Here we have another manuscript, and it's actually relate things to the journal, but it's a very tricky question. You need to actually look at your work with the best honest way and try to imagine where it could be published. And then, as I said, one above. Now, the way that I work with my students, actually, we start very early on to think about how to tell the story, even if we don't have all the data. And I'll tell you why. Because when we organize the results file, and it actually guides us what would be the next experiment, because you look at the data and you said, oh, here I would like to put this in this experiment. And we actually, our manuscript starts very early. We have many times our data and then some open circles or whatever squares in which we write what we want to see here, because it would fit very nicely. And then we go and do the experiment. So the writing process, organizing the material, help us focus on what would be the next experiments that would fit properly in there. Otherwise, it's very difficult because there are so many things that you can do. And if you don't think about how the story developed, for me at least, it's more difficult to stay focused. I would like to say comments about one comment that we said before, that Gustavo talked about the negative data, that sometimes it's very frustrating because you work very long time and you get nothing. So you mentioned your father, I'll mention my mentor in my PhD. He told me that Yes, in science, you must be lucky. But luck is not rain. It's not like distributed randomly. You need to work hard and make luck come to your bench. And how do you do that? You need to stay, to keep one eye from the bird's eye and ask yourself, I mean, am I going in the right direction? And if you don't, and I learned it, I think it's more of psychology than science, when people work very hard and they come in the weekend and stay the night and the direction is wrong, it's very difficult for them to admit that the direction is wrong and they should just leave it. So what I tell them, let's start another project. Let's do 2-3 things in parallel. Once the other things start succeeding, they leave the old stuff very easily because they want to see things succeed. So most of my students, at least at the beginning, tell them one project is not good. You need to have 2 and maybe even 3. Very shortly thereafter, they'll focus on the one which succeeds.
Professor.
I want to also put some insights. I think it's very important. First, about choosing your journal. I see there's a lot of young people here listening to us, and there are also very journals dedicated to young writers, right? So, for example, in many scientific societies have for junior doctors, junior writers, and junior journals specific. So that's a good way to start with in these journals. Second is for you to be a writer, in my opinion, first you have to read many articles. And when you do your research and writing your research, you're going to be doing this, you're going to be reading articles. So you're going to learn as you read others' articles. A second point is if you have an opportunity with your supervisor, also revise articles. Sometimes your supervisor receives articles for him to revise from specific journals, and you can help him to revise. So that's a good way also to learn to write. Second, another opinion that I have is comparing doctors with lawyers. One difference is that lawyers, when they spend many hours writing for a process, they gain. They're going to be gaining money. Doctors or researchers spend many hours and they don't gain money. They're not being paid for this. So that's one thing. And a different, another point between doctors and lawyers is when I write, I'm kind of thinking what the editor might think, what the reviewer might be thinking, and I'm going to be writing to convince this reviewer or this editor that I'm writing, to convince him my points of view. Just not leave it too much open. So I'm going to put arguments for this. Of course, the arguments are going to also serve for the readers once this is published. But first, I have to convince the editor and the reviewers about this. So I'm going to be writing for this, putting arguments and putting it in a logical way for this to make it simple for these reviewers and the editors to read. So that's a good way to think about it. It's make it simple, right? And sometimes when we're starting to write, we sort of like complicate things, right? Write too much. So that's one message that I sent with my students is try to make it the most simple and straightforward and don't go too much around in your arguments in writing.
Questions? I have a question for you. From the audience, any questions? José Maria Professor José Maria just said that one of the difficulties of an editor is to find peer reviews and also have this problem of the not to have time to write. And you comment about the lawyers. I completely agree. Do you think that our model is about to extinct? Because the fact is we work for free, we spend a lot of time, and basically we beg to someone to work for free. As for example, today there's this big trend to, for example, big journals, they invited you as an editor and say, okay, you are an invited editor, and then you have to call your friends, and your friends will pay to publish, and you're gonna have like a lot of work for free.
They collect the money.
And they collect the money, and worse than that, you have to buy your own article sometimes. And how do you see this, you, and then?
It's a good point. But before I would talk about comments about the question of Edson, I remember one day I was in Northwest at the department molecular biology and biochemistry, and my mentor was Margarita Dubokovic. And another graduate student asked her how to write a good paper. And she stopped. She think and told the guy, you have to do your best, but you have to convince you that is the best. So she talked about a tale in the university. Great research was in there. He published in the most scientific, great journal in the world. And one day a graduate student wanted to do his thesis with this guy and write a manuscript because he believed that this was important for his career. So he starts with the experiments, collect the data, and wrote the manuscript. And he followed the guy for all the university. And after found here, oh, I have a paper. Should you read this? So the guy takes this paper, puts it in his wallet, and going. The next day, the guy found this great research, his advisor, and asked, how was my paper? Oh, I believe that you can improve. So the guy drew again, wrote again, the next day, give another paper. And after a couple of days, he asked again, oh, I believe that you can do better. And after a couple of weeks, months, the guy was really tough. He was really sad with everything he gave you. I believe it's final. I cannot improve anything here. So the guy turned to him and say, oh, right now you read your manuscript. So you have to read your manuscript and you have to say, oh, I believe that is the nice, I did my best good job to publish. If you convince yourself, you can convince other people to accept your manuscript. I think it's important. And the problem is the peer review. The peer review is a problem, but I believe there's good people in the world. I think the people you survive.
But they don't have time. That's the problem.
You have time. You have time for many things. Why not for the science? If you give for the artificial intelligence,
They can help you.
yeah, can help a little bit, but see the science, how to write, how to choose your data, how think, what's the important, what's the innovation, or the clinical application. It's you, it's not the artificial intelligence. So I believe in the future, here, you have someone that can survive these ideas, and you have people to write manuscripts and do science.
I'd like to comment on the peer review process. So some of you have already reviewed papers. Some of you have received reviews on your manuscript. And I think that as an author, receiving a review sometimes, you know, there's always this reviewer number 3, which really doesn't like your work. And there's some reviewers that like or don't like. But I really think that what I'm expecting from a good review is to give me good ideas, to explain to me why, like, yes, this is right, but maybe you want to strengthen it by another thing, or how is this possible? Because here they enlighten me. And at the end, I'm positive that the review process improves the paper. Sometimes it makes you angry on the way and, oh, why are they asking? But then you do this experiment, say, hey, wow, and it opens a whole new story. So really, we need to take it in the positive way, I think. And I really like to get the reviews. I'm anxious. I'm curious to read the reviews. Where is it going to take me? And from the reviewer's perspective, I also think that it's important to know how to write the review. And my postdoc mentor always used to say, because some reviewers are nasty, and some reviewers on the same paper, you can get half a page review and you can get 5 pages, right? So where and how? But the most important thing is to think that when you give a review to someone, imagine that you are sitting with this person in the same room, okay, and talking to this person, right? You have to be you know, willing to say what you're saying. You can be critical, but in a way that you give your criticism in front of this person, and not because, you know, how you're behind the keyboard and this person doesn't know you, to be more you know, just ask, oh, so many, how do they want us to do this experiment, or it's another 3 years or 2 years and I don't know, this reagent doesn't exist, blah blah. You have to be yeah, in the reality.
A friend of mine once told me that the reviewer is so good, he almost sent an invitation for the reviewers to become an author as well. You made so good contribution to my paper. Please review your name, because I'm going to invite you to be an author. Unfortunately, we have to finish. I'd like just to the last word of each speaker, please, Professor.
Thank you. One strategy that sometimes I use to help your journal is inviting the proper reviewers to make a comment once the article is published. So that's one good, and also could also help the reviewer to motivate for next reviewers, since he's going to have a chance to have his name being mentioned or published in some. And thank you very much for, I think it was very helpful. I think for everyone. And as I mentioned here, for the young future writers, it's very important to get an interest. Don't think about monetary things. This is not where you're going to gain money. So you have to be sure of that. And it's a very it's a different satisfaction. And it's very important for the community here, for the academic environment here for us. It's to have good writers and research. Just for, I mentioned, for example, for young writers is case reports. So there's a lot of journals on case reports, and that's a good way to start also. Thank you very much for the invitation.
I just want to say that in my mind, the system as it's built at the moment is won't last very long, because it's not only the economical model, which, you know, we work very hard to raise the funding, we work very hard to conduct the science, we write the papers, we review the papers, we pay to publish, we pay to read them in subscription. I think it's not going to last forever, because it makes no sense. Actually, it's kind of a feudalic system. And it's pretty embarrassing to admit, but the scientists are very stupid in this regard. But I want to say another thing. For me, for instance, I'm getting, and I'm pretty sure it's true for other people in here. I'm getting so many requests for review of grants, of files of people who apply for position or promotion, manuscript, of course. That if I would accept them all, I would be 100% of my time would be focusing, dedicated for reviewing. I can do that. Most of them are turned down, and the only two examples or two circumstances that I do review is either a journal that I want to publish in, and I want to be in good relations with the editors. I'm very honest what I'm telling you. Or the other thing is someone that I mean, people that I appreciate and people that I'm kind of friend with, because you never know who's going to get it if I refuse. So those are the two occasions that I say yes. And still, a lot of my time is going on reviews, especially when I'm being asked for funding agencies to be in their selection committees and stuff. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of review to do. But I mean, there's no other way beside turning down, I don't know, maybe 85, 90% of the requests I just refuse.
Okay, I think that publishers also kind of realize the situation, and then recently they give you credits, like if you review a paper, either a commentary or, okay, yes, I will give you a discount if you publish in our paper. And there's also now in the ORCID, there is also this database where you get credit and everyone sees it. So if someone looks into your CV in this database, they can see what you reviewed and how active you are. And yes, we are also expected. This is our kind of public service to the field, and it's important. And we are acknowledged for this as well. The system, I agree, needs to change. And one thing that I feel, and I know many of my colleagues feel, I don't know about you, is that we never publish enough. It's always like this challenge. So let's see how we deal with that. Thank you. I enjoyed it a lot.
So if you want to write a good paper, first you have a good project. But I would like to say what Professor Baraka every day tell me about project. What is your question? You have to know what's your question to do a good project and a good manuscript. I think the final message is yes, what's your question? And also, thank you very much for Professor Tali and also Professor Eru for stay here. Sorry for the technical problems. And thank you very much.
Professor.
No. I thanks the professors, our visiting professors for this good meeting, and send a message for our graduates here. Thank you very much, and congratulations, Gustavo.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope that you in the audience have a good time, have enjoyed, and more than that, have learned. And thank you, Professor Carlos Serrano, Professor Baraka, Professor Ehud, Professor Tali, Professor José Maria, for this opportunity. I think that was very fruitful, was very useful, and I hope that this bond will be stronger and stronger. Thank you very much, and I'll see you. Let's take a picture. Vou tirar uma foto aqui? Cláudia? Excellent. Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very, very nice. Thank you for having us. It's important.
Yes.